I should have asked more questions. That's what I keep telling myself now, looking back on that Tuesday afternoon when Isaac Freeman offered me the job. Should have wondered why Sean Hunt walked away from 15 years at Millbrook Cemetery like his boots were on fire. Should have pressed harder when Freeman's answers came out all clipped and careful. But I didn't. Hell, I was too busy doing math in my head. The pay was good. Better than good. $42,000 a year for walking around a cemetery at night, checking on graves and keeping vandals away. That was $8,000 more than my paramedic pension, and after 23 years of racing toward sirens and pulling bodies out of twisted metal, watching over people who were already dead sounded like the easiest money I'd ever make. Freeman's office sat in the basement of the administration building, all concrete walls and fluorescent lights that hummed like angry wasps. File cabinets lined one wall, their metal surfaces dented from decades of use. The air smelled like old paper and something else, something earthy and damp that probably came from being underground. Freeman himself looked like he'd been filing paperwork since the cemetery opened, thin as a rail, with wire-rimmed glasses that kept sliding down his nose, and a way of speaking that made every word sound like it mattered. "Sean left rather suddenly," he said when I asked about my predecessor. His fingers drummed against the desk. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap, pause. Personal reasons. That should have been my first red flag. 15 years somewhere. You don't just up and leave for personal reasons without some kind of story. Death in the family, maybe. Health scare. Something. But Freeman's mouth stayed shut tight as a coffin lid, and I was too focused on the money to push. "The position requires someone reliable," Freeman continued. "Someone who follows instructions without deviation." The way he said that word, deviation, like it tasted bitter. I told him about my paramedic background, how I'd spent 2 decades following protocols that kept people alive, how I understood the importance of doing things by the book when lives were on the line. Freeman nodded along, but his eyes never quite met mine. They kept drifting to the file cabinet behind me, like there was something in there he wanted to check. "Excellent," he said. "Then you'll understand the importance of these." That's when he pulled out the notebook. Weathered leather cover, the kind that gets soft and dark from years of handling. The binding was held together with electrical tape, and the corners were rounded from wear. Freeman set it on the desk between us like he was placing evidence. 8 protocols, he said, for overnight hours only. These have been refined over many years. I picked up the notebook, heavy in my hands, heavier than it should have been for something so thin. The leather felt warm, like someone had just been holding it. When I opened it, the pages crackled with age, and that earthy smell got stronger. The first page was written in careful block letters, the kind of handwriting that comes from someone who wants to make sure every word is clear. Millbrook Cemetery. Night Protocols Established. 1987. Revised 1993, 2001, 2008, 2015. Below that, 8 numbered rules. I read them twice, thinking I'd missed something the first time through. "Count the fresh flowers on grave 247 at midnight," I said aloud. "Every night?" Freeman nodded. "Margaret Winters. She's been there since 1971. Family brings flowers every few days. The count varies." "Varies how?" "Sometimes there are more than the family left, sometimes fewer." He adjusted his glasses. "You just count them. Write the number in the margin. Don't remove any." The second rule was stranger. Ignore the woman in white walking the north path between midnight and 3 a.m. Do not approach. Do not speak to her. Do not follow. "Woman in white?" I asked. "Local urban legend. Teenagers sometimes dress up, try to scare each other. Best to just let them be." But his voice had that careful quality again, like he was reading from a script. The third rule made me pause. The Jacobs family mausoleum in Section C becomes extremely cold between 2 and 3 a.m., when outdoor temperatures drop below freezing. Avoid this area during these hours. Broken heating system? I asked. Something like that. Freeman's fingers started that drumming again. The building is old. Stone holds the cold differently at night. I kept reading. Rule 4. Any personal items left on graves after sunset must be collected and placed in the metal lockbox located in the maintenance shed. Do not examine these items. Do not attempt to return them to families. People leave things, Freeman explained. Letters, photographs, small mementos. It's better if they're secured overnight. Better how? Wind, weather, animals. But we were in October, and there hadn't been wind strong enough to blow away a letter in weeks. The remaining rules were equally strange. Don't use the bathroom in the chapel between 1 and 2 a.m. Plumbing issues. If you hear children laughing in Section D after midnight, continue your rounds without investigating. Teenagers again. Report any damaged headstones immediately, but don't attempt repairs during night hours. Liability concerns. Keep the notebook with you at all times and never leave it in the maintenance shed overnight. These seem, I searched for the right word, specific. Experience, Freeman said. Sean and his predecessor learned what works through trial and error. These protocols maintain the proper atmosphere at Millbrook after dark. Atmosphere. Another word that came out careful and measured. I should have asked what happened during the trial and error phase. Should have wanted to know why Sean Hunt, who'd followed these protocols for 15 years, suddenly couldn't handle them anymore. Should have wondered why a cemetery needed protocols at all, beyond locking gates and calling police if someone broke in. But I was thinking about mortgage payments and grocery bills and maybe having enough left over to fix the transmission in my truck. I was thinking about quiet nights walking paths instead of racing toward car crashes and heart attacks, and domestic violence calls where someone always ended up bleeding. The balance is important, Freeman said, like he was reading my thoughts. Millbrook has operated successfully under these guidelines for decades. As long as you follow them exactly, you'll find the work quite peaceful. He stressed that word exactly, the same way he'd stressed deviation earlier. I closed the notebook and felt that strange warmth again, like the leather was absorbing heat from my palms. When do I start? Tomorrow night, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Sean's locker is still available, number 43. You'll find additional supplies there. We shook hands. His was cold and dry, and he held on just a second too long, like he was trying to tell me something he couldn't say out loud. Walking to my truck, I tucked the notebook into my jacket pocket. It settled against my ribs like it belonged there, warm and solid and somehow familiar. The October air was crisp with the promise of winter, and leaves scattered across the parking lot in small whirlwinds. I told myself the protocols were just eccentric policies from a management team that took cemetery maintenance seriously. Told myself Freeman's careful answers came from dealing with too many years of bureaucracy and liability concerns. Told myself that counting flowers and avoiding cold buildings was a small price to pay for the easiest job I'd ever had. Looking back now, I can see how badly I wanted to believe all that. How desperately I needed those protocols to be nothing more than the quirks of an old institution run by careful men. But even then, driving home with that notebook warm against my chest, some part of me already knew I was lying to myself. For nearly a month, I'd followed Freeman's protocols like they were life-saving procedures, which, looking back now, maybe they were. Every night at midnight, I'd make my way to grave 247 and count the roses. Always 17. Fresh ones, too. Petals still soft, stems dripping with dew even on dry nights. Never saw who brought them. Never saw anyone in the cemetery during my rounds, actually, except for her. The woman in white. She'd appear somewhere along the north path between midnight and 3, just like the notebook said she would. Translucent thing, maybe 5.5 feet tall, wearing what looked like a wedding dress from the 40s. Sometimes she'd nod when our paths crossed. I'd keep walking, eyes straight ahead, following protocol number 2 to the letter. Ignoring her felt rude, but Freeman's rules were clear about that. The Jacobs Mausoleum gave me more trouble than the woman ever did. Every night between 2 and 3 a.m., I'd feel the cold radiating from that stone building in Section C before I even got close. Not regular cold. This was different. Deeper. It seemed to seep through my jacket, through my skin, settling somewhere around my ribs like ice water in my lungs. My breath would fog even on warm October nights when I walked past. The building itself looked normal enough during daylight hours. Granite walls, iron gates with ornate scrollwork, bronze plaques marking the family plots. But during those forbidden hours, the whole structure felt wrong, malevolent maybe, like it was watching me back. I never went near it during the 2 to 3 window. Not once. The personal items were easier to handle. Photographs mostly. Wallet-sized school pictures of kids, wedding photos in plastic frames, old Polaroids with white borders turning yellow, sometimes jewelry, wedding rings, St. Christopher medals, cheap costume earrings that meant everything to someone. Love letters written on notebook paper, folded and refolded until the creases were white lines through the ink. I'd collect them after sunset, seal them in the metal lockbox in the maintenance shed, just like Protocol 4 specified. The system worked. Whatever Freeman and his predecessors had figured out over the decades, it kept things contained, I guess, manageable, until my truck decided to die on me. Should have seen it coming. The Ford was 12 years old with 160,000 miles, and I'd been putting off the transmission service for months. But Tuesday night, or Wednesday morning technically, she finally gave up. Started making this grinding noise around 10:30, then just stopped. Rolled to a stop on Maple Street about 3 miles from the cemetery, dashboard lights flickering like Christmas decorations before everything went dark. I called Freeman's emergency number, went straight to voicemail, tried calling a cab. The dispatcher laughed when I told her where I needed to go. "Honey, we don't do cemetery runs after midnight. Insurance won't cover it." Click. So I walked. 3 miles in work boots isn't terrible during daylight. At night, with a 20-degree temperature drop and no streetlights after the first mile, it's a different story. My feet were killing me by the time I reached the cemetery gates. The muscles in my calves had tightened into knots, and I could feel a blister forming on my left heel where the boot rubbed wrong. I checked my phone as I approached the main entrance. 2:23 a.m. The cemetery's digital clock, mounted on a post near the administration building, read 2:47. I stopped walking, stared at both displays. Checked my phone again, thinking maybe I'd misread it in the dark. Nope, 2:24 now. The cemetery clock still showed 2:47, numbers glowing steady blue against the black sky. 23 minutes. That's how far off they were. Made no sense. My phone synced automatically with cell towers. Had to be accurate. But the cemetery clock. Freeman had mentioned it was new last year, installed by the county as part of some modernization project. Should have been accurate too. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, trying to work out what could cause that kind of discrepancy. Power surge? Software glitch. Then I remembered where I was and what time it was. Close enough to the forbidden hours that standing around asking questions probably wasn't smart. The protocols didn't account for arriving late. They assumed I'd be here on schedule, making my rounds in the proper order. But if the cemetery clock was right, I'd missed half my shift. If my phone was right, well, I was still cutting it close. I decided to trust my phone and started my usual route. That's when I saw the lights in the Jacobs Mausoleum. Candles. Had to be candles. The light flickered wrong for electric bulbs. Warm yellow glow dancing behind the iron gates, casting shadows that moved like people were walking around inside. But that was impossible. The mausoleum stayed locked, and I had the only key to the cemetery grounds. Freeman kept the individual building keys in his office safe. I pulled out my keychain thermometer, a little digital thing I'd started carrying after the first week, mostly to confirm what I was feeling near the mausoleum. 31 degrees. The ambient temperature was maybe 45, 50 degrees. Clear October night, no wind to speak of. And then I heard it. Crying. Soft, muffled. The sound a child makes when they're trying not to be heard. It came from inside the stone building. Through those iron gates, past whatever was casting those flickering shadows on the granite walls. High-pitched, heartbroken sobs that seemed to echo off the mausoleum's interior walls. Every instinct I'd developed over 23 years of emergency calls started screaming at me to stay away. The protocols were clear about this building during these hours. Freeman had been explicit. The notebook practically vibrated with warnings about Section C between 2 and 3 a.m. But that crying, I told myself it was wind. Had to be wind moving through the old stonework, creating acoustic tricks. Maybe loose mortar, gaps between the stones that whistled when air passed through just right. The candles were probably some kind of reflection. Streetlights from the main road bouncing off polished surfaces inside the mausoleum. Even as I thought it, I knew I was lying to myself. But I walked toward the building anyway. The iron gate wasn't locked. That should have stopped me right there. Hell, that should have sent me running back to the maintenance shed to call Freeman's emergency line again. But my hand was already pushing against the cold metal, and the gate swung open with barely a whisper. No rust screech, no protest. Like it had been waiting. The candlelight wasn't coming from candles at all. 7 birthday candles, melted down to stubs, sat on top of a small chocolate cake. The frosting had gone gray around the edges, and pink roses made from icing had cracked and hardened. But the light, Christ, the light was coming from the candles themselves, even though the wicks had burned down to nothing. Just this soft yellow glow emanating from the melted wax pools. I stood in the doorway of that mausoleum, my breath fogging in air that had to be 20 degrees colder than outside, staring at what looked like the saddest birthday party in history. The cake sat on a stone ledge beside 3 wrapped presents, small boxes covered in faded wrapping paper, one with balloons, another with teddy bears, the third just plain pink. Each one had a gift tag tied with curling ribbon, and I could make out the careful cursive writing even in that weird light. Happy birthday, Tammy. Love, Mom. The date on each tag read, April 15th, 1987. 36 years ago. I should have backed out right then. Should have followed protocol 3 to the letter and stayed clear of that building. But I found myself stepping inside, drawn by... what? Curiosity. 23 years of emergency calls had taught me to investigate, to assess, to help. Hard habits to break, even when every instinct screamed at me to run. The crying got louder. But that's when I realized my mistake. The sound wasn't coming from inside the mausoleum at all. It was coming from directly behind me, close enough that I could feel the sob catch in someone's throat. Close enough that the next breath would brush against my neck. I spun around. Nothing there. Just the open gate and the cemetery beyond, bathed in that sickly yellow glow from the impossible candles. But the crying continued. Right where I'd been standing, like a child trying not to make noise but failing. Trying to be brave but too scared. Too alone. Too dead. I got out of there fast. Left the presents and the cake in that horrible light, practically stumbling over my own feet as I backed away from the mausoleum. The gate swung shut behind me with a soft click, and the crying stopped like someone had flipped a switch. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. I finished my rounds on autopilot, checked the maintenance shed, counted those damned roses at grave 247. 17, same as always. But I couldn't stop thinking about that cake, those carefully wrapped presents, the way the date had been written in such hopeful script. When Freeman arrived at 7 a.m., I was waiting by his office door like a man with a confession to make. You went inside. Not a question. Freeman looked at me through those wire-rimmed glasses and somehow already knew everything. His fingers started that familiar drumming pattern on his desk. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, pause. The Jacobs Mausoleum. I nodded. No point lying to him. Sit down, Nick. He gestured to the same chair I'd sat in during my interview, the one that faced the file cabinet behind his desk. There are things I should have told you from the start. Things Sean couldn't handle in the end. Freeman pulled a thick manila folder from the bottom drawer of his desk. The tab read, Jacobs, Tammy, 1987, in the same careful handwriting I'd seen on those gift tags. When he opened it, I caught a glimpse of newspaper clippings, incident reports, and what looked like a child's school photo. 7 years old, Freeman said, holding up the picture. Blonde pigtails, gap-toothed smile, bright blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. Tammy Jacobs died on April 15th, 1987, during her birthday celebration. The date from the presents, the cake with 7 candles. Her family had come to visit her grandfather's grave. He'd passed the month before. Mildred thought it would be nice to have the party here, where Grandpa could somehow be part of it. Freeman's voice took on that careful, measured tone he used when delivering bad news. Spring thunderstorm rolled in fast. Lightning struck the old oak tree in Section C. I knew that tree. Massive thing with a split trunk, standing about 30 feet from the Jacobs Mausoleum. Tammy was playing underneath it when the lightning hit. Killed her instantly. Freeman closed the photo and set it aside. Mildred Jacobs had been our head groundskeeper for 12 years. Good worker. Knew every inch of this place. But after Tammy died... He trailed off, drumming his fingers again. She blamed herself, I said. Completely. Said she should have been watching closer. Should have seen the storm coming. Should have gotten Tammy inside. Freeman pulled out another document. Handwritten pages in the same script I'd seen on the gift tags. Mildred's journal entries, started about a week after the funeral. He read from the first page. Went to visit T's resting place today. Left her favorite doll. She would have been so excited about her birthday party. I ruined everything. I have to make it right. The presents in the mausoleum. 36 years worth of birthday gifts. For 3 months, Mildred came here every night after her shift ended. She'd unlock the family mausoleum and set up these elaborate birthday celebrations. Cake, candles, presents, decorations. Like Tammy might somehow show up and blow out the candles. Freeman's glasses had slipped down his nose, but he didn't push them back up. Frederick Manning found her body in November of that year. Hypothermia, the coroner said. She'd been sitting in that mausoleum for hours in freezing weather, waiting for her daughter to come to the party. Frederick Manning. I'd seen that name on the maintenance schedule. Still worked here, apparently. That's when the supernatural activity started, Freeman continued. At first, just cold spots and strange sounds, but within a year we had a full manifestation. Tammy's spirit, anchored by her mother's overwhelming grief and guilt. She appears during the anniversary hour of her death, between 2 and 3 a.m., still waiting for someone to celebrate her birthday. The crying I'd heard, the child's voice, trying so hard not to make noise. For 36 years, I've maintained protocols to contain her presence. The cold in the mausoleum, the restriction on approaching during those hours. It keeps her manifestation limited, manageable. Freeman finally pushed his glasses back up and looked directly at me. But last night you violated the critical window. You gave her attention, acknowledgement. You saw her gifts. My stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means Tammy Jacobs now knows you exist, and after 36 years of waiting for someone to notice her birthday party, she's not likely to leave you alone. I should have known something was wrong when I found the guest book. 3 days after Freeman's revelation about Tammy and Mildred, I went back to the mausoleum. Stupid, maybe, but 23 years of emergency calls had taught me that avoiding problems doesn't make them disappear. The iron gate stood slightly ajar. I was certain I'd closed it properly that first night, heard the soft click myself. But there it was, open just wide enough for a child to slip through. The guest book sat on a small marble ledge I hadn't noticed before, leather-bound and weathered. Most entries were standard condolence messages from the 80s and 90s, but near the bottom of the page, in purple crayon that looked fresh despite the impossible date, someone had written in careful block letters, "Thank you for coming to my birthday party. It was the best one ever. Love, Tammy Jacobs. April 15th, 1987. Below the message was a small handprint, no bigger than my palm, pressed into the page like wet paint. The crayon still smelled waxy. New. I stared at that handprint for maybe 10 minutes, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Kids breaking into the cemetery, maybe. Some sick joke. But the date, and the way the crayon seemed to shimmer slightly in the candlelight that shouldn't have existed. That was Tuesday night. By Thursday, Tammy had found my apartment. I lived, I guess, since I can't go back there now, in a second-floor unit on Elm Street, 15 minutes from the cemetery. Nothing fancy. One bedroom, kitchen that barely fits a table, living room with a couch I'd owned since my divorce. The kind of place where you hear every footstep from upstairs and the refrigerator hums loud enough to wake you. Thursday morning around 3:30, I woke to the sound of my front door opening. Not breaking, opening. The slow creak of hinges that needed oil, then the soft thud of the door settling against the wall. I lay there in bed, heart hammering, listening to nothing, no footsteps, no voices, just that refrigerator hum and the distant sound of traffic on Route 12. I grabbed the baseball bat I keep beside the bed, old habit from the paramedic days, when some calls took you to neighborhoods where people didn't appreciate ambulances, and crept to the bedroom door. The apartment felt different. Colder. The air had that damp, earthy smell I'd grown to associate with the cemetery. Muddy footprints led from my front door to my bedroom. Small footprints, child-sized. The mud was black and rich, the kind you find in old graveyards where decades of rain have mixed with, well, with whatever's been buried there. The prints were perfectly formed. I could see the tread pattern from small sneakers, even the wear mark on the left heel where someone had dragged their foot. The trail ended at the foot of my bed. I followed those prints with my flashlight, bat gripped so tight my knuckles ached. Each footprint was still wet, leaving dark smudges on my hardwood floor. Whoever, whatever, had made them couldn't have been gone long. But the apartment was empty. I checked every closet, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. When I finally worked up the nerve to go back to my bedroom, I found the drawing on my pillow. It was done in crayon on construction paper, the kind they use in elementary schools. A child's drawing of the cemetery. Crude, but recognizable. There was the administration building with its red brick walls, the maintenance shed with its slanted roof, and in the center, a small stick figure with yellow hair standing beside a gray rectangle that had to be the mausoleum. At the bottom, in that same careful block lettering, "This is where I live now." I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and the baseball bat across my knees, staring at that drawing and trying to convince myself there had to be a rational explanation. Kids playing pranks, someone with a key to my apartment. Anything except what I knew in my gut was true. The singing started Friday night. I was heating up a can of soup, nothing fancy, just something to get food in me before my shift, when I heard it drifting through my apartment. "Happy birthday to you," sung in a high, sweet voice that could only belong to a child. But the words were wrong. Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday, dear Tammy. Happy birthday to me. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, not from the walls or the vents, but from the air itself, like the sound was woven into the oxygen I was breathing. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, fading away so gradually I couldn't pinpoint when it actually stopped. The soup can slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a wet splat. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, listening to the silence, before I noticed the present on my doorstep. It was wrapped in that same balloon paper I'd seen in the mausoleum, tied with a yellow ribbon that looked hand-curled. No note, no delivery slip. Just sitting there on my welcome mat like it had materialized out of thin air. Inside was a photograph, black and white, the kind they took for school pictures in the 80s. A little girl with blonde hair and pigtails and bright blue eyes, smiling at the camera with that gap-toothed grin kids get when they lose their front teeth. On the back, someone had written in careful cursive, "Tammy Jacobs, age 7, Millbrook Elementary." I knew that face. I'd seen it in Freeman's file, but this photo was different, more personal. The kind a mother would keep on her refrigerator or tucked into her wallet. Saturday brought more presents, 3 of them spaced throughout the day, each one wrapped in different paper, teddy bears, pink flowers, circus animals, but all containing photographs of Tammy, at the park, at the beach, blowing out candles on a birthday cake, always smiling, always 7 years old. By Sunday, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Freeman's emergency number. "She's getting stronger," he said when I finished telling him about the footprints and drawings and photographs. We were sitting in his office again, that same concrete bunker with its humming fluorescent lights. Tammy's been dormant for 36 years, contained by the protocols, but now that she knows you can see her, she's waking up. Freeman pulled out another folder, thicker than the first one. This one was labeled simply, "Mildred, Personal Effects." After Mildred died, we packed up her belongings from the groundskeeper's shed. Most of it was standard, tools, supplies, work schedules, but we also found these. He opened the folder and showed me a stack of journals, maybe 15 or 20 of them, spiral-bound notebooks with covers worn smooth from handling. The top one was dated September 1987, 2 months after Tammy's death. Mildred documented everything, Freeman said. Her attempts to communicate with Tammy, the birthday parties she set up, the experiments she tried. She believed she could bring Tammy back. Not resurrect her exactly, but create a bridge between the living world and wherever Tammy had gone. I picked up the top journal and flipped through it. Mildred's handwriting was small and precise, filling every line of every page. Diagrams of the mausoleum, lists of items she'd brought for the birthday parties, detailed descriptions of cold spots and strange sounds and moments when she thought she felt Tammy's presence. She was trying to complete something, Freeman continued. Some kind of ritual or ceremony that would allow Tammy to, I don't know, find peace, move on. The journals contain instructions, preparations, specific things that need to be done in a certain order. "You think this could help her?" I asked. "Help Tammy, I mean. Let her rest?" Freeman nodded, but his expression was troubled. "I tried reading through them once about 10 years ago, got maybe halfway through the first journal when—" He paused, rubbing his forehead. "When Tammy appeared in the shed." "She talked to you?" "She asked why I hadn't brought birthday cake." Freeman's voice was quiet. Just like that, standing right there in the doorway, clear as daylight. 7 years old in a white dress, looking at me like I'd forgotten something important. I felt that familiar chill, the one I'd been getting every time someone mentioned Tammy's name. "What did you do?" "I ran." Freeman laughed, but there was no humor in it. 20 years of cemetery work, and I ran like a scared child. Haven't been in that shed after dark since. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both staring at the journals. Finally, Freeman looked up at me. "The manifestations you're experiencing, they're going to get worse. Tammy's been alone for 36 years, and now she's found someone who acknowledges her existence. She's not going to let you go easily." As if to prove his point, my phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. When I opened it, there was a photo of my apartment building taken from the outside, my bedroom window circled in red crayon. The message read, "Can't wait to play tomorrow." Freeman saw my expression and leaned forward. "It's escalating faster than I expected. She's getting stronger every night, focusing more attention on you. Soon, she won't just be leaving presents and drawings, she'll want more." I thought about those muddy footprints leading to my bed, about the child's voice singing birthday songs in my empty apartment, about how each night since Tuesday the encounters had grown more intense, more personal. Like Tammy was testing boundaries, seeing how far she could push into my world. The phone buzzed again. This time the message was just 2 words. Birthday soon. Things started falling apart faster after that Sunday meeting with Freeman. Not just the supernatural stuff, though that got worse too, but the whole careful balance I'd been trying to maintain between my old life and whatever this job was turning into. Jordan Vasquez called me Tuesday morning around 10. I was drinking coffee in my kitchen, staring at the 4th birthday present Tammy had left on my doorstep. This one wrapped in paper covered with tiny carousel horses. My hands were still shaking a little from finding it there when I'd gone to get the mail. "Cross, we need to talk," Jordan said. His voice had that careful tone cops use when they're about to tell you something you won't want to hear. "Can you meet me at the cemetery? There's something you should know." I found him standing near the main gate, still in his security uniform, even though his shift had ended hours ago. Jordan's a big guy, probably 6'2", built like he used to play football, but he looked smaller somehow. Worried. "What's going on?" I asked. He glanced around the cemetery entrance, then back at me. "Saturday night during your rounds. I was doing my patrol of the perimeter fence when I saw you walking through Section D." He paused, rubbing his jaw. "Thing is, you weren't alone." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "There was a kid with you, small, maybe 7 or 8, walking right beside you like she belonged there." Jordan's voice got quieter. "I called out, figured maybe some kid had wandered in, gotten lost. But you didn't hear me, and when I looked through my binoculars..." He stopped, shook his head. "I could see through her. Just barely, but enough to know she wasn't normal." I thought about Saturday night, trying to remember Section D. I'd done my usual route. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then again, I'd been so focused on avoiding the Jacobs mausoleum during the danger hours that I might have missed other things, other presences. "You're sure about what you saw?" "Dead sure." Jordan pulled out his phone, showed me a blurry photo taken from a distance. 2 figures walking between headstones, one clearly me in my dark jacket, the other harder to make out, a pale smudge that might have been a child in light clothing. "I took this around 2:30 a.m. That's definitely you, right?" It was. And looking at that ghostly second figure, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Tammy wasn't just visiting my apartment anymore. She was following me during my rounds, walking beside me like some kind of supernatural shadow. The thought made my skin crawl. "There's more," Jordan said. "I've been asking around, talking to the day crew. Courtney James has been finding things." We drove to the maintenance building where Courtney was inventorying supplies. She's a small woman, probably late 20s, with the kind of steady hands you need for detailed groundskeeping work. But when Jordan mentioned the decorations, those steady hands started trembling. "Every morning for the past week," Courtney said, leading us through the cemetery grounds. "I come in at 7, start my rounds, and there's stuff. Birthday stuff." She showed us what she meant. Balloons tied to headstones in Section C. Not regular balloons, but the foil kind shaped like numbers. A 7 and a 3, shining silver in the morning sun. Paper streamers wrapped around the angel statue near the chapel, bright pink and yellow crepe paper that fluttered in the breeze. A happy birthday banner strung between two oak trees, the kind you'd buy at a party store with glittery letters that caught the light. "I clean it all up every day," Courtney said. "Take down the balloons, remove the streamers, roll up the banners. But the next morning—" She gestured helplessly. More stuff. Different decorations, but always birthday-themed. Always. The worst part was how fresh everything looked. The balloons weren't deflated. The streamers weren't faded or torn by wind. Like someone had just finished setting up a party, waiting for guests who would never come. "Where does it all go?" I asked. "The stuff you clean up." "That's just it," Courtney said. "I bag it, put it in the dumpster behind the maintenance building. But when I check later that day, the bags are gone. Not just empty, completely gone. Like they were never there." I thought about the presents on my doorstep, the ones that appeared overnight without any sign of how they'd gotten there. Tammy wasn't just manifesting decorations. She was somehow acquiring them, moving them, setting them up like she was preparing for a party that had been postponed for 37 years. The temperature situation got worse too. By Wednesday, the cold around the Jacobs mausoleum had spread beyond just the nighttime hours. I discovered this when Freeman asked me to check the drainage around Section C during my Thursday afternoon prep time. The moment I got within 50 feet of the mausoleum, the air changed. Not just cooler, actively cold, like walking into a freezer. My breath started fogging even though it was 60 degrees and sunny. The grass around the building had frost on it, actual white crystals clinging to the blades while everything else was green and normal. I tried to get closer. Needed to check the drainage grates Freeman had mentioned, but at 30 feet the cold hit me like a wall. Sharp, bitter air that burned my lungs and made my eyes water. I lasted maybe 2 minutes before I had to retreat, my hands numb inside my work gloves. That's when I realized how much this was affecting my actual job. I couldn't maintain the cemetery properly if I couldn't get near one of the main sections. The cold was becoming dangerous, not just uncomfortable, but the kind of temperature drop that could cause frostbite or hypothermia, even during broad daylight. And it wasn't just the cemetery anymore. The supernatural activity was bleeding into my regular life, making it impossible to pretend this was just a work problem I could manage with Freeman's protocols. Wednesday night, I woke up to find my refrigerator covered in drawings. Crayon pictures stuck to the door with what looked like birthday stickers, balloons and cake slices and party hats. All of them showed the same thing: stick figures at a party. One yellow-haired figure sitting at a table with a cake, other figures standing around watching. My birthday party, written in purple crayon at the top of each picture. Thursday, I found a birthday card in my mailbox. Not delivered by the postal service, no stamp, no postmark, just my name written in that same careful cursive I'd seen on the gift tags. Inside, a child's drawing of the cemetery with "Come to my party," written in silver crayon that sparkled when I moved the card. Friday morning, I discovered my truck had been decorated overnight. Streamers tied to the antenna, balloons attached to the door handles, a happy birthday banner stretched across the windshield. My neighbors must have thought I'd lost my mind when they saw me frantically pulling it all down before anyone could ask questions. But the real turning point came Saturday afternoon. I was grocery shopping at the Piggly Wiggly on Main Street when I heard it. That same child's voice I'd heard in my apartment, singing "Happy Birthday to You" in the cereal aisle. Other shoppers didn't seem to notice, just kept pushing their carts and comparing prices. But I could hear her clear as day. That sweet voice echoing off the shelves of Cheerios and Frosted Flakes. That's when I knew for certain that Tammy's presence wasn't fading. If anything, she was getting stronger, more persistent. The manifestations were increasing in frequency and intensity, spreading beyond the cemetery grounds into my everyday life. And every gift, every decoration, every song felt like an invitation, or maybe a demand. I needed answers, real answers, not Freeman's careful explanations or his decades-old protocols. The only place I could get those answers was in Mildred's journals, sitting in that maintenance shed Freeman had been avoiding for 10 years. The shed where Mildred had conducted her experiments, where she'd tried to build a bridge between the living world and her dead daughter. The shed where Tammy's supernatural anchor was strongest. I'd been putting off reading those journals because I knew what it would mean. Going into that shed, especially after dark when Tammy was most active, would be like walking directly into her domain. The place where her mother's grief had given her the power to affect the physical world, where the boundary between life and death was thinnest. But every new manifestation made it clearer that ignoring the problem wasn't working. Tammy wasn't going to fade away or lose interest. She'd waited 36 years for someone to acknowledge her existence, and now that she'd found me, she wasn't letting go. And time was running out. April 15th was coming, Tammy's birthday, the anniversary of her death. 37 years since the lightning strike that had started everything. I had a sick feeling that whatever supernatural forces were at work here would reach their peak intensity on that date, when the barrier between past and present was thinnest. I should have known April 15th would be different. Should have felt it coming, the way you sense a storm building before the first clouds show. But I didn't. Just walked my usual route toward the maintenance shed at 2:30 in the morning, same as I'd done every night for the past month, carrying Freeman's protocols in my jacket pocket like some kind of talisman. The shed sat maybe 50 yards from the Jacobs mausoleum, close enough that the supernatural cold had been creeping toward it for weeks now. I'd noticed it Tuesday. Frost on the shed's metal siding when the rest of the cemetery stayed warm. Wednesday brought ice crystals on the door handle. By Thursday, my breath fogged when I got within 20 feet of the building. Tonight felt different, though. Heavier, like the air itself had weight. The shed door stood wide open. I stopped dead, maybe 15 feet away. In 37 years of following protocols, first as a paramedic, now here, you learn to trust when something's wrong. That door should have been locked. I'd checked it myself 3 hours earlier, turned the handle, heard the mechanism catch, standard procedure. Now it gaped like a mouth. Did you remember to bring candles for my cake? The voice drifted out from inside the shed, clear as anything, sweet and hopeful, the way kids sound when they're trying not to seem disappointed but can't quite hide it. 7 years old. Maybe 8. Definitely Tammy. I'd been hearing her for weeks now, in my apartment, at the grocery store, during my rounds. But this was different, stronger, like she was actually standing in there waiting. I asked if you brought candles. Her voice again, patient but with that edge kids get when adults aren't paying attention. For the birthday cake, Mommy always brought 7 candles. Pink ones were my favorite, but any color works. My hands started shaking. Not from cold, though the temperature around the shed had dropped at least 20 degrees, but from something deeper. Recognition, maybe. The way your body knows danger before your brain catches up. The journals. Freeman had mentioned them Sunday, said they contained Mildred's experiments in communicating with Tammy. Said he'd tried reading them 10 years back, but quit when Tammy appeared asking about birthday cake. Now I could see them through the open doorway, scattered across the concrete floor like someone had swept them off the metal shelving and let them fall where they would. But the pages were moving, fluttering, turning, rustling against each other in waves. Not random either. Purposeful, like invisible hands sorting through them, looking for something specific. The night was dead calm, not even a whisper of wind through the oak trees, but those journal pages danced and flipped like they were caught in a hurricane. I took another step closer. Had to. 23 years of emergency calls teaches you to move toward problems, not away from them, even when every instinct screams retreat. There's so many words in Mommy's books, Tammy's voice continued, drifting from the shed's dark interior. Big words I can't read yet. But some pages have pictures, birthday pictures, party pictures, She drew them for me. The cold hit me full force as I reached the threshold. Not just winter cold, something else entirely. The kind that seeps through your jacket, your shirt, your skin, and settles in your bones like it plans to stay. My breath came out in thick clouds, and ice crystals started forming on my eyelashes. Inside the shed, Mildred's journals lay everywhere. Maybe 20 of them, spiral-bound notebooks with dates written in black marker on their covers. September 1987, October 1987, November 1987, month after month, year after year. The most recent one I could see was dated April 1990, 3 years after Tammy died, 7 months after Mildred froze to death in the mausoleum. The pages kept turning themselves, faster now, rustling and snapping like paper in a fire. I caught glimpses of Mildred's handwriting, neat cursive that got progressively shakier as the dates advanced. Drawings, too, just like Tammy said, stick figures with yellow hair, birthday cakes with 7 candles, a small mausoleum with an open door. She tried so hard to find me, Tammy whispered, her voice closer now, like she was standing right behind me, though I didn't dare turn around. Came every night with cake and presents and decorations, waited for me to come home from where I went when the lightning came. I understood then. Standing there at the threshold, watching those pages flip and turn, I finally got what Freeman had been trying to tell me, what the protocols were really about, what Mildred had started in those final months before hypothermia claimed her. She'd been trying to complete something, a ritual maybe, a bridge, some way to reach across whatever separated her from Tammy's spirit and bring her daughter peace, or bring her daughter back. The journals contained 36 months of a grieving mother's desperate experiments, documented attempts to breach the barrier between life and death. And now Tammy was asking me to finish what Mildred couldn't. "The candles are important," she said, her voice patient but insistent. 7 of them, pink if you can find them. They helped me remember what birthdays felt like before the lightning. The papers settled for a moment, all those fluttering pages going still like someone had called for quiet. In the silence, I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and fast in my ears. Could smell something sweet drifting from the shed's interior. Birthday cake frosting, maybe. Vanilla and sugar and that particular chemical tang of food coloring. I knew what waited inside those journals. Mildred's pain, documented day by day. Her growing desperation as conventional grief transformed into something else entirely. Her discoveries about the thin places between worlds. The times and conditions when the living could reach the dead. The specific rituals and offerings that might, just might, allow a mother to hold her lost child one more time. Or allow a lost child to find the peace she'd been denied for 37 years. "Will you read Mommy's words to me?" Tammy asked, her voice so close now I could feel breath that shouldn't exist against the back of my neck. I've been waiting such a long time for someone to finish the story. I stood there at the shed's threshold, 1 foot on the grass outside, 1 foot ready to cross into whatever Mildred had created. The journals held answers. I was certain of that. They contained the key to understanding what had gone wrong 37 years ago and what needed to be set right now. But they also contained something else, something that had made Freeman flee 10 years back and avoid this building ever since. The moment stretched between heartbeats, between breath and decision, between the world I knew and whatever waited beyond that open doorway.